Welcome, sleepy souls, to the Creepy Night Show. Tonight, I'm here to help you drift into deep, peaceful sleep. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime stories. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if there's a story you'd like to hear next, I would love to know that too.
Would you stay the night in a school that's been abandoned for 30 years? That was the question that started everything. The kind of question tossed around during a late-night hangout when the air smelled of cigarettes, gasoline, and teenage bravado. The old Ashford High School had been shut down since the late 80s, a place whispered about more than it was remembered. Its crumbling brick walls loomed over the edge of town like a rotting monument, windows shattered, graffiti scrawled across its face. Nobody went there, not anymore. Parents warned their kids not to, and kids swore they wouldn't. But warnings are just invitations when you're 17. It was Marcus who brought it up. He leaned back in his rusted pickup, grin wide, tossing an empty soda can into the dirt. "Bet none of you have the guts," he said. "Stay a whole night in Ashford. Doors lock at sunset. No leaving until sunrise. First one to chicken out buys the rest of us gas for a month." The group laughed nervously. There was Emma, the sharp-tongued skeptic who hid her fear behind sarcasm. Tyler, quiet and jittery, always tagging along because he hated being left out. Sarah, who was fearless until the dark got too quiet. And then there was me, Jonah, the one who knew better but said yes anyway. Because you don't want to be the one who says no. By the time the sun began to dip behind the cornfields, we were standing in front of Ashford High. The gates hung crooked on rusted hinges. Beyond them, the building loomed like something alive, its hollow windows staring back at us. The air smelled damp, heavy with mildew and something sweeter, almost metallic. Marcus pushed the gate open with a screech. "Well, ready for history class?" Inside, the halls stretched into shadows. Lockers stood open, doors creaked at the faintest breeze, and the faint echo of our footsteps made it sound like someone else was walking with us. We carried flashlights, beams slicing through the dark, dust swirling in the air like ash. "This place is disgusting," Emma muttered, kicking aside a moldy textbook. Tyler lingered near the back, shining his light nervously at the classroom doors. "Feels like it doesn't want us here." "Or maybe," Marcus smirked, "it doesn't want us to leave." The words hung in the air, heavier than they should have. We set up in the old gymnasium, unrolling sleeping bags on the warped floor. The basketball hoops were rusted, the scoreboard frozen in some forgotten game. Graffiti on the walls told stories of others who had dared to enter, names, crude drawings, and the phrase, "Don't stay past midnight." I laughed when I saw it, nervously. "Some local legend crap," I said, "probably just to scare kids." But even as I said it, I felt the weight of the words pressing down. Midnight. Why midnight? We passed around a flashlight, telling ghost stories like we were kids again. Laughter filled the gym, but it was strained, brittle. Every creak in the distance made Tyler flinch. Every gust of wind rattling the broken windows sounded too deliberate. When the clock tower outside struck 11, the sound carried through the hollow building, deep and resonant. We froze. "Relax," Sarah whispered. "It's just the old bell." But Marcus shook his head. The tower was dismantled. My uncle helped take it down. The silence that followed was suffocating. And then, bong! The sound echoed again. Midnight. The lights flickered on. Not our flashlights, the actual school lights. Fluorescents buzzed to life overhead, humming and sputtering until the whole gymnasium glowed with a sterile brightness. Our breaths caught. "Power grid's been shut down for 30 years, Emma said flatly. This isn't possible." Somewhere down the hall, a door slammed. Then another. The sound of footsteps, dozens of them, began to echo through the corridors. Laughter, shouts, the unmistakable chaos of a school between classes. But it was midnight, and we were supposed to be alone. Sarah's face went pale. "Guys, do you hear that?" We all did. The sound of lockers slamming shut. Voices. A teacher's whistle. The school wasn't abandoned anymore. And then, faintly, the gymnasium doors rattled as if someone was testing the handle from the other side. Marcus stood, trying to look brave, but his voice shook. "Who's there?" No answer. Just the creak of hinges as the doors began to open. Our flashlights flickered and died, leaving us under the too bright fluorescent glow. The first figure stepped inside. A boy. Tall, pale, dressed in an old Ashford High varsity jacket, his face blurred in a way I can't explain. Behind him came more, dozens of students, their features washed out, their movements unnatural as if they were being played on a loop. Emma whispered, "They're not real." But the boy in the jacket turned his head slowly, directly toward us, and smiled. The gymnasium was never meant to feel that bright. The fluorescent lights buzzed harshly above us, flickering in a rhythm that made the whole scene feel like a bad dream. None of us had touched a switch, and yet every corner of the room was lit up as though class were about to start. We stood frozen, backs pressed to the bleachers, while the first figure, a boy in an old Ashford High varsity jacket, moved into the room. His footsteps echoed sharply against the warped wooden floor, too loud for just one person. Behind him, more students trickled in. They came in groups, pairs, and stragglers, all slipping silently through the gym doors as though they'd been summoned by the toll of that impossible midnight bell. At first, it was the blur of their faces that unsettled me most. It was like trying to remember a dream right after waking. You knew there were details, but the harder you looked, the less you could pin down. Their skin was pale, almost washed out, and their eyes were wrong, too dark, too empty. But what really terrified me was their casualness. They didn't march toward us like monsters or stalk like predators. They acted normal. They moved the way kids do when the bell rings and the hallways flood with life, laughing, whispering, brushing past each other. Only their voices sounded muffled like a radio station just out of tune. Marcus, being Marcus, tried to stand tall. "It's just some prank," he muttered. "Townies trying to scare us. They probably wired this whole place with generators." But I could hear the strain in his voice. He didn't believe it any more than the rest of us. The boy in the varsity jacket stopped in the center of the gym and tilted his head toward us. His grin widened, stretching unnaturally, until it looked painted on. His lips moved. But the sound that came out was a mixture of static and whispers, layered with dozens of voices that didn't match his body. We couldn't make out the words, but we felt them. They crawled under our skin like insects. Emma swore and yanked at the gym doors behind us. Locked. Of course they were locked. She rattled them harder, slamming her shoulder against the metal bar, but it didn't budge. Tyler had collapsed against the bleachers, hugging his knees, his flashlight rolling uselessly across the floor. "We shouldn't be here," he whispered, rocking slightly. "It's midnight. We weren't supposed to stay past midnight." I remembered the graffiti we'd laughed at earlier. "Don't stay past midnight." The pale students began moving closer now, not in a rush, but in that careless way a crowd drifts forward, inevitable, unstoppable. Their sneakers squeaked faintly against the floor, and their blurred faces twitched in and out of focus as though the lights above them were strobing. Sarah grabbed my hand. Hers was ice cold. "Jonah, what do we do?" I didn't have an answer. My throat felt locked, my brain spinning in useless circles. Then the loudspeaker crackled. Every head in the gym, ours and theirs, snapped upward at the sound. The intercom system, dusty and dead for 30 years, hissed with static before a voice oozed through, deep and grainy. "Students, return to your classrooms. The day is just beginning." The crowd of pale figures turned in unison, drifting toward the exits like obedient children. They didn't run. They didn't stumble. They just dispersed, filing through the doors until the gym was empty again. But the lights stayed on. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Emma's voice cracked as she broke it. "Nope, I'm done. Screw the dare. I'm not staying here another second." Marcus finally stopped pretending. His jaw clenched, sweat dripping down his forehead. "We'll find another way out. Back exit, window, whatever. We're not trapped." But when we reached the doors on the far side of the gym, we found them locked too, chains wound tightly around the handles, though none of us had heard or seen them being put there. Every door we checked was sealed. Every window was covered with thick, unbreakable wire mesh that hadn't been there earlier. It was as though the school had decided we were not leaving. Tyler whimpered, tugging uselessly at the chains. "It knows we're here. It wants us here." Sarah spun on him. "Shut up! You're making it worse!" But I knew Tyler wasn't wrong. The moment the bell had tolled midnight, the building had changed. It wasn't abandoned anymore. It was alive again. And we were its students. We wandered the hallways in a tight group, our footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. Every fluorescent light above us glowed harsh and buzzing, illuminating rows of lockers, faded posters, and dusty trophies as though it were still 1987. The air smelled faintly of chalk and floor wax, fresh despite the decades. Every so often we'd hear noises ahead of us, footsteps, lockers slamming, laughter. But when we turned the corner, the hall would be empty. Still, the sound clung to the air like ghosts that didn't care if we heard them. We passed the library. Its doors were open, the faint sound of pages turning drifting out, though no one was inside. A stack of books lay on a table, arranged neatly as if someone had just been reading them. Titles about history, biology, algebra. Ordinary. But the top book was wrong. Its cover was blank. Its spine read only, "Attendance." Emma reached for it, but I grabbed her wrist. "Don't," I said. I didn't know why, but I knew we shouldn't touch it. "Fine," she muttered, jerking away. But her eyes lingered on the book as we left. The PA system crackled again as we turned down another hallway. "First period begins now. Students, take your seats." The lockers around us all slammed shut at once, the sound deafening, echoing down the corridors. Tyler screamed, covering his ears. And then the classroom doors along both sides of the hall creaked open. Not one, not two, all of them. From inside, chairs scraped across tile, desks shifted, and the faint, shuffling sound of dozens of students rising from their seats filled the air. Sarah grabbed my arm, her voice trembling. "Jonah, they're coming." And she was right. From every classroom, pale figures began to step out into the hall, blurry, smiling, their eyes locked on us. The hallway was never meant to feel that narrow. But as the pale students filed out of the classrooms, one by one, row after row, the space seemed to shrink. Their sneakers squeaked faintly against the tile as they shuffled closer, their blurred faces twitching in and out of focus with every flicker of the lights. It wasn't a charge. It wasn't a chase. It was worse. They were casual, calm, as though we were just classmates they hadn't seen in a while. The kind you pass in the hallway with a nod, except every single one of their dark, hollow eyes was fixed directly on us. Marcus grabbed the nearest locker handle like it might anchor him to reality. "Back up," he muttered, his voice shaking in a way I'd never heard before. "Back up. Keep to the center." We did as he said, shuffling together, shoulder to shoulder. The crowd pressed in slowly from both sides, their numbers filling the corridor until the walls themselves seemed alive with pale figures. Emma tried to act tough, shoving at one that got too close. Her hand went right through its shoulder. She stumbled back, screaming, not because she hadn't touched anything, but because she had. Her hand hadn't gone through air. It had gone through something solid and ice cold, like frozen meat. The ghost boy didn't react. His smile just widened, stretching too far across his face, as though Emma's panic was exactly what he'd wanted. Then the intercom crackled again, so loud that it made us all flinch. "Attendance will now be taken." The voice was neither male nor female. It was deep, hollow, and layered, like dozens of voices speaking at once. The sound of chalk screeching across a blackboard followed, sharp enough to make our teeth ache. Somewhere, a pen scratched against paper. Then the voice began. "Sarah!" The second her name was spoken, Sarah gasped. Her body jerked forward like she'd been pulled by invisible strings. She clutched my arm, nails digging deep into my skin. "Don't let go!" she screamed. I tightened my grip, but her body was yanked again, harder this time. Her shoes screeched against the floor as she slid toward the open classroom doors, toward the sea of pale, waiting figures. "Sarah!" Emma and Marcus lunged for her, all three of us grabbing on. Tyler just crouched against the lockers, sobbing, his flashlight beam swinging wildly across the walls. But the pull only grew stronger. Sarah's eyes went wide, tears streaking her cheeks as she begged us not to let go. Her voice rose into a panicked wail that cut through me like a knife. And then, "Present." The voice on the intercom said the word flatly, and Sarah's scream was cut short. She was gone. 1 second she was in our grip, the next she wasn't. The hallway was empty where she'd been. My hand still clutched the sleeve of her jacket, but the fabric dissolved into dust between my fingers. Emma staggered back, her face pale, her breathing ragged. "No! No, 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 where is she? Where did she go?" The intercom hissed again. "Marcus!" Marcus froze. His mouth dropped open, his knuckles white as he gripped the locker. "No," he whispered. "No, you can't." The pull came instantly, dragging him toward the classroom doors. He thrashed violently, slamming his fists against the lockers, kicking at the tile, his voice hoarse as he shouted, "Help me! Don't let them—" We grabbed him, but the force was relentless, like an undertow sucking him into deep water. His face twisted in terror, his eyes bulging, veins standing out in his neck as he fought. "Present!" The word dropped like a hammer, and Marcus was gone. His echoing scream was cut off mid-sound. Emma broke then. She started shrieking, clawing at her own skin, slamming her fists against the lockers. "We're next! We're next! It's calling us! Oh God, it's calling us!" She stumbled backward, slipping on the tile, until she crashed into Tyler. He barely reacted, rocking in place, his whisper a broken chant. "We shouldn't have stayed. We shouldn't have stayed." The intercom hissed again. "Emma!" Emma screamed, scrambling to her feet, running down the hall with a speed I didn't know she had. She dodged the pale figures, shoved past them, her cries echoing as she vanished around the corner. For one horrible second, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd escaped. But then I heard it. Present. The scream cut off. The hallway went silent except for the buzzing lights. That left me, and Tyler. He was still crouched on the floor, rocking back and forth. His voice cracked as he whispered, "It'll call my name. It'll call my name and then yours. And then it's over." And deep down, I knew he was right. The intercom crackled once more. "Tyler!" He screamed, a raw, broken sound as his body was dragged across the floor. His fingers left bloody streaks on the tile as he clawed desperately, but it was useless. His scream ended the same way as the others. Present. And then I was alone. The pale students had stopped moving. They lined the hallway, dozens of them, their blurred faces tilted toward me, their dark eyes unblinking. The silence was unbearable, pressing down on me until I couldn't breathe. The intercom hissed, and the voice spoke my name. Jonah. The sound of my name over the intercom wasn't just noise, it was a weight. It pressed down on me, filled my chest, rooted my feet to the tile like cement. The syllables stretched unnaturally, echoing in a way that made the air vibrate. My throat tightened. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until my lungs burned. Jonah. The pull started. It wasn't like a physical hand this time. It was inside me, like a rope looped around my ribs, tightening with every heartbeat, dragging me toward the open classroom doors. My shoes squealed against the tile as I fought against it, throwing myself backward, clawing at the lockers. My hands bled from the cold metal edges, but the sting barely registered. Dozens of pale eyes followed me. The ghostly students didn't move closer. They didn't need to. They just watched, silent, their smiles faint and patient, like they knew what always came next. "No," I whispered. Then louder, "No!" I pressed my back flat against the lockers, shaking, my chest heaving. "You're not taking me, you're not—" The intercom fizzed again. "Attendance is mandatory." The force yanked harder, slamming me forward. My shoulder cracked against a locker door, pain flaring down my arm, but I didn't stop fighting. My hands scrambled for something, anything to hold on to. They found a fire extinguisher bracket on the wall, and I clung to it with everything I had. My knuckles turned white, the metal biting deep into my palms. The pull nearly tore my arms out of their sockets. My feet lifted off the ground. I dangled like a rag doll in a hurricane, teeth gritted, tendons straining. I could feel the classroom pulling me, the unseen gravity sucking harder and harder. My body lurched, bones screaming, vision going blurry. And then I realized something that twisted my stomach into a knot. The names had been called in alphabetical order: Sarah, Marcus, Emma, Tyler, Jonah. My name was last, which meant there wasn't anyone else. I wasn't just being pulled into the classroom like the others. I was being pulled into the final roll. "Attendance complete," the intercom droned. The ghost students tilted their heads in eerie unison. Their blurry smiles widened until their faces seemed to split. And then, for the first time, one of them spoke. "You're the teacher now." My grip faltered. I gasped, my sweaty hands slipping on the bracket. The force yanked again, harder, tearing me forward. I screamed, dragging my nails against the wall, leaving long bloody streaks. But the pull was too strong. My body flew into the classroom. I hit the floor hard, skidding across the tile. My head slammed against a desk leg, white-hot pain exploding behind my eyes. I blinked through the haze, clutching my skull, and forced myself upright. The classroom was wrong. It wasn't dusty and broken like before. The desks were polished, lined up neatly in rows. The chalkboard at the front was spotless, fresh white chalk resting on the tray. Light poured in through windows that shouldn't exist, warm daylight that made the room glow unnaturally bright, and every desk was filled. Sarah, Marcus, Emma, Tyler. All of them sat among dozens of pale, hollow students. Their faces were blank now, their eyes dark voids. Their hands rested neatly on their desks, their spines ramrod straight, like obedient pupils waiting for a lesson. Sarah's lips parted, her voice flat and cold. "Take attendance, Jonah." I shook my head violently, stumbling backward until I hit the door. No, I'm not doing this. I'm not part of this." The intercom crackled overhead. "Class begins when the teacher is ready." The chalk floated from the tray by itself, scratching words across the board in jagged, messy lines. I forced my eyes to focus. "Attendance is mandatory." The windows darkened instantly, the false daylight replaced by black voids. The air thickened, humid, pressing into my lungs until I coughed. The sound echoed too loudly, like it bounced through unseen tunnels beneath the floor. I looked back at the students. Their faces had twisted into grotesque mockeries of humanity, mouths too wide, eyes sinking deeper, skin sagging like wax under heat. And yet, every single one of them stared at me, waiting. Emma's voice, flat as stone, whispered, "Call the names, Jonah, or they'll call yours again." The chalk floated to the attendance sheet on the teacher's desk. My name glowed faintly at the very bottom of the list, the ink pulsing like a heartbeat. It was then that I understood. If I didn't play the role they demanded, if I didn't become the teacher, they'd erase my name by calling it again. And when they said present, I wouldn't just disappear like the others. I'd be gone for good. My throat tightened. My vision swam. I realized my hands were trembling so violently I could barely stand. And still, all those hollow eyes stared at me, waiting. The intercom buzzed one last time. Begin, Mr. Jonah. I stood at the front of the classroom, my chest rising and falling so violently it felt like my ribs might snap. The silence was suffocating. 30 pairs of hollow, dark eyes were locked on me, waiting. The desks were perfectly aligned, not a chair out of place, the order so rigid it made my skin crawl. I tried the door. My hand gripped the knob, twisted, pulled. Nothing. It didn't budge. It wasn't just locked. It was sealed, as if welded to the frame. My reflection wavered faintly in the narrow window, but it wasn't right. My reflection's mouth was smiling while mine hung open in horror. "Take attendance," Sarah whispered again. But her voice didn't sound like her voice anymore. It was layered, dozens of voices speaking in unison through her lips. I shook my head violently. "No, I'm not playing your game." The chalk floated from the tray once more, hovering in midair. Without a hand to hold it, it scraped across the board with a screech that made my teeth ache. "Attendance is mandatory." The sound reverberated in my skull, and before I could protest, the students all whispered together, a unified hiss of sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "Call the names." My knees buckled. I stumbled back into the desk, my hand gripping the wood for balance. The attendance sheet sat on the desk, the paper impossibly white, glowing faintly in the dimness. The names were printed neatly, one after another. At the very bottom, mine pulsed faintly like a warning light. I realized then that refusing wasn't an option, not unless I wanted my name erased, not unless I wanted to vanish the way the others had. My lips trembled as I whispered the first name. Sarah Miller. Her head snapped up instantly. Her blackened eyes locked onto mine, and her lips moved in perfect sync with the word that slid from her throat like something old and rotting. Present. Her voice wasn't hers. It was deeper, layered, like 1,000 students all speaking through her mouth. My stomach lurched. I forced my gaze back to the paper, my heart hammering like it might burst. Marcus Hall. His head lifted. That same word. Again. Present. Then Emma. Then Tyler. Each one answered in the same unnatural chorus, their faces shifting subtly with every response. Their skins sagged, their smiles grew wider, their eyes hollowed further until they didn't even look like my friends anymore. And still the names kept coming. Students I didn't know, names that had no meaning to me. Dozens of them. I read them one by one, my throat raw, each syllable scraping out like broken glass, and every single one answered. Present. The classroom seemed to pulse with the sound. The air grew thicker, hotter. Sweat dripped down my face, soaking into my shirt. My vision blurred around the edges, like the room itself was shrinking in on me. When I reached the last name before mine, my voice cracked. James Porter. Present. And then, silence. My eyes drifted down to the final line. My name, Jonah Price. The letters pulsed, glowing faintly as though alive. I froze. If I called my own name, I knew what would happen. I'd answer. I'd be theirs. But if I didn't, what then? The chalk began to scratch furiously across the board, faster and faster, the letters jagged and wild. Attendance is mandatory. Attendance is mandatory. Attendance is mandatory. The students whispered along with it, the sound swelling into a deafening chorus. Their mouths moved in unison, their teeth too sharp, their tongues black. The voices layered together until it wasn't words anymore, it was just a roar of command. Call your name, Jonah. I dropped the paper. My hands shook so hard I thought they'd snap in half. I backed into the chalkboard, my spine pressing against the cold surface. My voice cracked into a scream. No! I'm not like you! I'm not part of this! The intercom buzzed overhead. The voice that came through was lower now, almost gentle. The teacher always takes attendance, even if it means calling themselves. The chalkboard surface behind me went soft, spongy, like wet paper. My back sank into it. the chalky surface sucking at my clothes, pulling me in like quicksand. I clawed at the frame, my nails tearing, but the more I fought, the more the wall consumed me. The last thing I saw before the black swallowed my vision was every student rising in unison, their chairs scraping across the floor, their hollow voices chanting, "Present, present, present." And then, silence. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the classroom anymore. I was standing at the front of a different room. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and chalk. Rows of desks stretched before me, neat and orderly. Every single desk was filled. The students were staring at me, waiting. And in the corner of the blackboard, scrawled in neat white chalk, were the words, "Mr. Price, Homeroom 2B." The chalkboard gleamed faintly under the buzzing fluorescent lights. The words, "Mr. Price, Homeroom 2B" carved into it like a brand. My name, my role, my sentence. The desks before me were filled with silent, pale faces, some familiar, most not. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, packed into neat rows. Their dark eyes fixed on me with an intensity that felt less like attention and more like hunger. I swallowed hard, my throat raw. The classroom was too bright, the light buzzing so loudly it drilled into my skull. My heart pounded. I staggered back against the chalkboard, pressing my palm flat against the cool surface. But it no longer gave way. It was solid again. There was no escape. "Why me?" My voice cracked, weak, useless in the cavernous silence. "Why are you doing this to me?" For a long moment, the students didn't move. Then, in eerie unison, they all leaned forward. Their mouths stretched into smiles that didn't belong on human faces, too wide, too sharp, too knowing. And then, together, they spoke. "The school must never close." The words shook me to my core. They echoed not just in the air but in my bones, vibrating through marrow and muscle. My stomach twisted violently. "What does that mean?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. Sarah, if it was still Sarah, tilted her head. Her black eyes glittered. "A school exists as long as there is a teacher to teach and students to learn. If there is no teacher, the bell tolls the end." Emma's lips parted next. "And when the bell tolls the end, all who were ever present are lost forever." Marcus leaned forward, his voice a hiss. "That's why you are here." My chest tightened. I understood. All those names on the list, all those students marked present, the ones who should have graduated, grown old, died decades ago, the ones trapped in this place because the school refused to end. It needed someone to call the names. It needed someone to play the teacher. And now, it had me. "No," I croaked, shaking my head violently, backing into the chalkboard again. "No, I won't do it. You can't make me do this forever." The intercom crackled above, the familiar static filling the room. The voice that spoke was calm, almost kind. "The school never closes, Mr. Price. Class is eternal." The bell rang. The sound was deafening, shattering the silence like an explosion. It wasn't a normal school bell. It was deeper, older, vibrating with something that felt alive. My ears rang, my vision blurred, and the floor beneath me trembled. The students all rose in unison, their chairs scraping back. Their voices merged into one booming chorus that made the walls shake. "Teach! Teach! Teach!" I staggered forward, clutching my ears, screaming, "Stop! Please!" But my voice was nothing compared to theirs. The attendance sheet appeared on the desk again, pristine, glowing faintly. The chalk hovered in the air, waiting. "No," I whispered. "Not again." But my body betrayed me. My hand lifted against my will, fingers wrapping around the chalk. My lips trembled, my mouth opened, and before I could stop myself, the first name fell from my throat. Sarah Miller. Present. The second name. Marcus Hall. Present. The third. And on it went, one after another. Each name a shackle binding me tighter to this cursed room, Each response another nail sealing me into this role I could never escape. By the time I finished, my voice was ragged, my throat raw, and still, the sheet refilled itself. A new list, a new set of names, endless, eternal. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a punishment that ended when the list was done. The list would never end. It would fill itself again and again and again. Because as long as I kept calling names, the school stayed alive. As long as I played the teacher, the students would remain. And the school would never close. My legs gave out. I collapsed into the chair behind the desk, my face buried in my shaking hands. I wanted to scream, to cry, to rip myself apart just to end this. But the bell rang again, loud and final. The students rose. Together they whispered, "Welcome, Mr. Price. Class is now in session. Forever." And then I understood the truth, the most horrifying truth of all. The school had never been abandoned. It had always been full. The teachers had simply changed, one by one, and now, I was next in line. The final bell echoed, shaking the walls, rattling the windows, vibrating in my skull until I thought my head would split apart. My scream joined the sound, but it was swallowed whole by the roar of eternity. The last thing I remember before the blackness consumed me was the chalk scratching across the board on its own. Attendance is mandatory.